Hello there. Welcome to this episode of Just a Few. Patrick Antoine is my name. I'm glad that you are joining me for this session and maybe for other videos in this platform that allows me the opportunity to provide biblical responses to questions from people just like you. If you have a question and you would like for me to provide you with a response, feel free to do so. You can send in the question via email at the email address on your screen now, and I'll try to provide you with a response as soon as I can. Today's question has to do with human sexuality, and God made us as sexual beings, and so we can't get around questions that relate to sexual intercourse and sexual deviance and see what the Bible has to say about these sort of things. So here's today's question. Very simple, but very important question. Question is masturbation a sin? Of course, by masturbation, we are speaking about stimulating yourself to derive sexual pleasure, sexual arousal, sexual gratification, without committing sexual intercourse with someone else. This is an issue which is not directly addressed in the Bible. You will not see a scripture that mentions that word masturbation or any such similar term. However, whenever we have a topic or an issue which is not directly addressed in scripture, we need to not assume that automatically gives us the right to engage in that practice that you may be thinking about on the grounds that, well, I don't see anything about that in the Bible. If we use that type of reasoning, someone could say, well, I don't see Jesus ever going to the toilet in the Bible. So does that mean it's wrong to go in the toilet? Does that mean we are not supposed to go into the toilet because Jesus never did it? And you hear people making arguments like that sometimes. Well, I don't see it in the Bible. Not because you don't see it or it's not there in the Bible means that it's a free pass to do something. Be careful when you use that line of argument, meaning the silence of scripture. The scripture is silent on something, so that gives us the freedom to do it. Rather, one should seek to determine if there are in the Bible other culturally appropriate things for that culture that may apply to our situation in a different way. And that's what you look for, and that's how you can make some form of, you could arrive at some form of conclusion as to what the spirit of the Bible, if I may use that term, would indicate about that issue. So don't look for loopholes with the absence of things in the scripture. It's not mentioned in the Bible. In addition to this issue of masturbation, which most people associate with singleness, a single person, you'll be surprised to know that there are people who engage in masturbation even who are married, because they might have ended up in what we call a sexless marriage. One partner is, for whatever reason, unable to or deliberately withholds sex from the other partner, and the other partner chooses to resort to masturbation for sexual gratification. You'll be amazed that is present. But you see this issue of masturbation and pornography, if you see me speaking to this issue with a bit of passion, it's because that's what God delivered me from. That's my background before I became a Christian. So you find I'll be saying a few things here from my own experience. And I know that there are many young people or people in general in our churches who are struggling with this issue of pornography, masturbation, unclean thoughts, and it's kept very silently, but it's out there. And the churches would prefer, in a lot of cases, not to have to confront or deal with it, but it's like a ticking time bomb. About a decade ago, if I'm not mistaken, there was a study done by Google on, they categorized data based on country of origin, where people were downloading the most pornography from. And our state of Trinidad and Tobago ranked very high, if not at the top of the list of places where pornography is being downloaded from through Google and through the internet constantly. So we do have a major problem with masturbation linked to pornography, and it's prevalent. And we could act holier than thou and think it's not there, but it's there, I'm telling you. And we need some divine intervention to treat with that. So it's not mentioned in the Bible, but I want to now, I've used quite a few minutes already in this introduction, to mention 5 things. 4 of them are biblical, and the other one is biological, that you need to be mindful of in addressing this issue of, is masturbation sin? So let's go with the first 4 from a bit of a biblical perspective. The first one is the issue of lust. Can a person, or can masturbation occur without lusting? And I think, well, my position is the answer to that question is no. Because you begin to have lustful thoughts about somebody, and that is what stimulates you, and then you bring yourself to some form of sexual gratification. What does the Bible have to say about lust? Jesus said in the Gospel according to Matthew chapter 5 verse 27, in fact, these are the scriptures that convicted me and eventually led to my own conversion. He said, "You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not commit adultery." I always felt I knew that, and I felt, well, masturbation is not committing adultery or intercourse with anyone, so I felt justified until I read this. Jesus said in verse 28, "But I say to you, that whoever looks at a woman," meaning, of course, someone of the opposite sex, he's speaking there in that male-dominated culture, but he speaks there, looks at a woman to lust for her, has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Adultery starts in the heart, and if you think you could commit the act of masturbation without lusting for that person, whether it's a person of the same sex or of the opposite sex, or whether it's into bestiality or some sort of thing in your thoughts, you are going to lust after someone. And Jesus said, if you begin to lust for someone in your heart, you have already committed adultery. You are an adulterer. So for that reason, and that's enough, that reason alone, I would say, of course, masturbation is a sin, because a precursor to masturbation, or associated with it, is lustful passion. A second issue is the issue of sexual and mental or emotional purity. When you begin to passionately lust after, if you're a male woman or female man or whatever combination we have in our modern twisted society, you actually allow your thoughts to become conditioned a certain way. Let me let you read listen to what the Apostle Paul says about sexual purity and what God has called us to be, especially as Christians. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, reading from verse 3. "For this is the will of God." In case you want to know what the will of God is about sexual activity and so on, your sanctification. That you should abstain from sexual immorality, meaning of all forms. That each of you should know how to possess his own vessel, or his own body, in sanctification, in holiness, purity, and honor. Verse 5. Not in passion of lust, like the Gentiles who do not know God. That no one should take advantage of, okay, I'll still read it, and defraud his brother in this matter, because the Lord is the avenger of all such, as we also forewarned you and testified. And the verse 7 says, "For God did not call us to uncleanness, but in holiness." When you begin to lust after that person or those persons, or use pornography or whatever, you begin to create an atmosphere in your mind that your mind becomes almost like a nesting ground for unclean spirits. Those unclean sexual thoughts that come into your mind during that act didn't come out of nowhere. It came from spirits who put those thoughts in your mind, and you become defiled spiritually and mentally and emotionally. And God says you have not been called to uncleanness, because unclean thoughts would have come from unclean spirits, and you leave yourself open to that. And what that also does and I'm speaking here again from experience, is that you begin to objectify, like in the case of a man, you begin to objectify women, so that whenever you look upon a woman after that, you're not even in the act of masturbation, your eyes just tend to drop on her cleavage, her breasts, her hips, her genital areas, her lips, because you begin to objectify that person or those persons because of the condition of your mind. Masturbation has that effect on you because of unclean spirits. And you see, you see women as sex objects. And you begin to lust after them. You can't look at them in a healthy way anymore because of what masturbation, the effect it has upon you. Number 3, the issue of sexual bondage. The Bible speaks to that. The devil ensnares you with masturbation and pornography and so on, and then he makes you one of his slaves. And you may say, well, I could stop whenever I want, until you realize I'm not in charge anymore. Someone is pulling the strings now. I can't seem to stop. I'm in bondage. That maybe you have come out of singleness and you get into marriage and you find yourself still struggling sexually, and you will go back to masturbation for whatever reason, because you might find it's more fulfilling in some respects. You're in bondage now. The devil has strapped you. He has enslaved you. Jesus in verse 34 of John chapter 8 says this. Jesus answered them, you're speaking to the religious leaders, most assuredly I say to you, whoever commits sin is a slave of sin. You're now in bondage to this thing. Paul in Romans chapter 6 verse 16 says, do you not know that to whom you present yourselves slaves to obey, you are that one's slave whom you obey, whether of sin leading to death or of obedience leading to righteousness? You become a slave to sexual passions, and you'll find you every day, whatever, you're going back to lustful passions, and you are now in bondage. The 4th reason that the Bible speaks to as far as this is concerned is the issue of self-control or personal discipline. You lose control. You're no longer a disciplined person because your passions stir up and you have to respond instead of you being in control of your passions. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 9:27, but I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should become disqualified. Paul says, I have learned to bring my body into subjection, to discipline myself, because God has made us with some very powerful powerful desires, the desire for food, the desire for sex, and desire for sleep, and so on. Those are powerful desires God put in it. And yes, we are sexual beings and we have sexual desires, but you need to know how to discipline yourself, else you become, like I said, a slave. You find yourself in bondage. So those are 4 areas that the Bible does speak to about our lives, our sexual purity, and so on. And the last area is the issue of biology. I am not a subject matter expert on this area. Of course, I'm not a medical practitioner. I'm not a scientist. But you read the material out there from the subject matter experts, and they speak about at least 2 powerful hormones that the brain, in a section of the brain called the hypothalamus, releases. These are feel-good hormones, and the body releases this in order to help you to overcome depression and so, as well as to experience feelings of exhilaration. And oxytocin is one, dopamine is the other one. And you read about these powerful hormones, and when you become sexually stimulated, the body doesn't know if you are having sexual intercourse with someone else or if you're stimulating yourself. The body releases this hormone, and it is so powerful, it gets into your bloodstream, and it affects so many things. And I know for me, it had a strong effect, masturbation, because I have a bit of a photographic memory, and you remember these things that you meditate on, these images, these persons you lust after, and for years you struggle with shaking off those powerful images on the screen of your mind, because that's the power of these hormones. So the brain releases that during masturbation, just as it does during sexual intercourse, and the images that you conjure up in your mind during this act of masturbation or watching pornography and so on, they become almost impossible to erase from your thoughts and your psyche and so on. So then you could end up with some long-lasting effects on your psyche, on your sexual performance, that you always need to be watching something else or lusting after somebody else to become sexually aroused. It affects your intimacy with your partner when you may become married, and it could also affect your fidelity or faithfulness to your partner. So all of these things have to be taken into consideration. It's more than just, well, it's just me. I'm not. It's a harmless offense if it's an offense at all. There's no victim here. You become the victim, and sometimes later on down the road, your partner becomes a victim because the partner suffers, wondering why is it you can't seem to be sexually stimulated by the partner, but you need pornography, you need to be lusting about other women or men accordingly. And so you might find yourself on a slippery slope by engaging in this, so to speak, meaning that it could lead to other types of immoral behavior that you could have nipped in the bud by avoiding masturbation. Just like a person starts off with smoking tobacco, gradually you decide to try a bit of alcohol, then to marijuana, then to cocaine. There are so many people out there who started with pornography and masturbation, and they find themselves in all types of what do you call it? These type of perverted behavior and abusing children, rape, all types of things. It started there. And the best thing is to avoid that by staying away from sexual stimulation of yourself, because that's not the way God intended for you to find sexual gratification. There's one last verse I wanted to leave with you about warning you about stimulating yourself outside of marriage or in marriage, and for whatever reason you're doing it. It's in the book of Song of Solomon, where it's a book that is very, very powerful and emotive in its poetic descriptions of love and intimacy and marriage and so on. He says, the writer here says, promise me, Song of Solomon 2:7. It's also found in chapter 3, verse 5 and chapter 8, verse 4 of Song of Solomon. Promise me, O women of Jerusalem, and I say even our young men too, by the gazelles and wild deer, poetic language, not to awaken or stimulate love until the time is right. The New Living Translation says, promise me that you wouldn't go tampering with your sexual desires until the time is right. And as far as God is concerned, the time is right when you're in a committed, monogamous relationship with someone of the opposite sex in a covenant of marriage. My name is Patrick Antoine. I've said quite a bit on that because there is a lot to say on the issue, even though the Bible doesn't speak to it directly. Thank you for the question and the opportunity to respond. Until the next time, grace and peace be multiplied.